Well, Rings of Power has returned for a second season, and while its debut season wasn't critically panned, it was far from a hit. It was a very polarizing show, to say the least. Mainstream critics seemed to love it, and the audience was mixed to very unhappy with the final product. For me, I didn't really enjoy it much, if at all. To many's surprise, the first 3 episodes of Season 2 have garnered more favorable reviews. But I was skeptical, so let's see how it stacks up. Like, subscribe, comment down below, and tell a friend. And if you're new here, check out the rest of the channel, and let me know what you think. Let's dive into Rings of Power Season 2, Episodes 1 through 3. I am a massive fan of Lord of the Rings. It remains one of my favorite trilogies of all time. The closest a set of films will ever get to perfection, in my opinion. The Hobbit was a step backward. Not terrible, but the trilogy was unnecessarily drawn out into 3 movies. Uninteresting plot lines were forced in, and there was a clear overutilization of CGI. Needless to say, I'm always excited to return to this universe. And I'm sad to say that after watching the first season of Rings of Power, I was extremely disappointed. I found it an absolute slog to get through. I didn't find many of the characters very interesting at all. There were a lot of parallel story threads that don't really serve the main plot at all. And some of the acting is just bad, and the dialogue just really pedestrian. What I will say is that the production value is exceptional, which it should be considering it cost Amazon $700 million. This show is expensive, and it's a real shame that Season 1 was a brutal affair. The biggest thing that Season 1 was missing, in my opinion, was the magical Middle-earth aura that made the original trilogy so memorable. Granted, what Peter Jackson did was impeccable, and it would be hard for anyone to emulate that success. So with the premiere of Season 2, do the early reviews have any validity to them? Well, kind of. I've watched all 3, and here is what I'll say. It so far is a slight improvement over Season 1, and I mean slight, literally. And the biggest problem is that I just still don't care about this story. This show just doesn't interest me very much, and I think it's still an issue with the storylines that they're attempting to mesh together and the lack of compelling characters. To be quite honest, outside of the elves and Sauron, I don't really remember many of the characters' names because they're all just so one-dimensional and boring. And look, like Season 1, it isn't all a disaster. The production value is still incredible. The set designs, the special effects, the location shooting, the costume designs. I mean, this show is beautiful to look at. Money well spent in that department. I have no complaints in that regard. Now, with the narrative, it's slightly enhanced, but not by much. Episode 1 is probably my favorite because of the backstory we get for Sauron. It's kind of interesting, more interesting than anything else going on in this show. It definitely still has its plot holes that don't really fit into the overarching narrative. There's some stuff that doesn't make sense, but look, I'm giving this show as much credit as I can, and I'm able to overlook those things because I just don't enjoy the rest of the show very much at all. And I know there's still some complaints in regards to Tolkien's work. Full disclosure, I have read the original 3 novels as well as The Hobbit, but I've never had any exposure to any of the ancillary works like the Silmarillion or anything else. And I don't know how accurate these flashbacks in this episode are, but just getting a history on where Sauron was before he became the All-Seeing Eye was fun to watch. I enjoy, well, I don't even know if I want to say enjoy. I find the main plot thread involving Galadriel, Elrond, and the elves, especially the aspects that deal with Sauron deceiving Celebrimbor, into crafting the titular Rings of Power, it's interesting, and I think it could be very compelling. But it's just sort of boring. But it's weird because it's hands down the most interesting storyline, and in my opinion, it should have been the sole focus of this show. They're building up Sauron's rise back to power after being betrayed by Adar to be pretty intriguing as well, but we haven't even really scratched the surface on that narrative thread yet. But outside of those two storylines, I just have no interest. I think the Gandalf Harfoot portion is the worst. It is for sure the least interesting, in my opinion. Those characters are just annoying, and that thread is so boring. How do you ruin such a delightful people like the Hobbits? The solo elf storyline doesn't do anything for me. I don't even remember that guy's name, to be honest with you. They're clearly looking for a way to intertwine these narratives as well, considering Isildur has become acquainted with that character, but it's just not working. The Numenor portion has a chance to be really enjoyable, a sort of political drama style akin to Game of Thrones, but the issue is that none of the characters involved in that storyline are striking enough to really care about. And that's honestly the problem with this whole show. If you don't have characters that the audience cares about or is able to relate to, it doesn't matter how grand or epic the storylines are written to be. Oh, and I forgot about the dwarves. They're up there with the Hobbit plot, honestly. It's just so over the top, and the acting in those portions is definitely the worst of this whole series. Every time they cut to the dwarf storyline, I immediately just lose all focus. I do not care at all. It's just so... It's so bad. The dialogue's the weakest, the acting's the weakest. Their plot doesn't really make sense at all. It's all because of the father and son not communicating. I don't remember those guys' names either. That's what I'm saying. None of these characters are interesting. I know we're only 3 episodes in at this point, and I am willing to give the rest of this season a shot because I have seen a few minor improvements. But man, this show is just still a chore to get through half the time. I think this series is trying to tell so many stories too quickly. It's being pulled in too many directions. It tried to pull off sort of a Game of Thrones style epic, but it just pales in comparison to the height of that show. This show needs better writers. I think it's as simple as that. I don't hate it, but it's just... I don't even know how to rate it. It's just, it is what it is, I think, and it's just not fun. And I feel bad because I don't think a lot of these actors in this cast are bad, but they're just portraying such badly written, shallow shells of characters that they just aren't interesting, and they're just working with what they have, honestly, and it's not fun to watch. But that's... I don't know. A show just being fine, especially with this budget in this universe, that's not good enough for a Lord of the Rings product compared to what we've had in the past. And look, I know The Hobbit's not my favorite, and it received a lot of criticism for a lot of it deserved. But the show just... It doesn't even live up to The Hobbit standards, and those are pretty low. And I don't know. I mean, I just really, really hope there's this sort of drastic change in the rest of this season and that it proves me wrong. That's all I can pray for at this point.